Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bridge the Gap DFS podcast. Got a real exciting podcast in store for you guys today. We got a special guest, and this is a guy that I've been looking forward to chatting with for quite some time, and it was really important for us to get something on the calendar before football season, before we did. So the timing is perfect with NFL season right around the corner. Everybody's excited about their fantasy football drafts, probably this weekend or the next weekend, and getting rolling with some NFL DFS. So our podcast guest today is the creator, the founder, the absolute magician, wizard. I like to call him a good baseball man. It's Matt from SaberSim. We're also joined by our boy Sequence, who will be our co-host today. Sequence worked out. It just ended up that he was in town this week, and so we're going to have everybody on. So, Chris, why don't you say hi to the audience?
What's up, everybody? JG, thank you for having me on. And Matt, it's going to be good to talk to you.
So Matt, good baseball man. I'm so excited you're here, buddy. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on, John. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. Yeah,
I think it's important because you have such an amazing product that us users, we develop an identity with the product, but I think getting the person that actually created it, learning about their story, I think that's just going to paint a much better picture, and you're going to be able to tell us everything that went into it much better than somebody like me who's just passionate and uses it on a day-to-day basis. So that's some of the stuff that I want to dive into later in our chat. But you just got back from the DraftKings Live Final in Chicago. How was it?
Oh, it was awesome. Yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't have a seat myself, but I was representing Giant Squid. He had a wedding to go to this weekend, so I was there as his proxy, which is kind of the best of both worlds in a way, because I didn't have to actually sweat anything, but got all the benefits of, we had an event at Wrigley Field and did live batting practice and fielding drills, and we basically just walked around the field for, a couple hours, and then the actual event was, really cool. It was great to meet a bunch of other pros and, some people that have used SaberSim for a while, and it's great to kind of put some faces to the names. So, it was a great time.
Now, was this the first live final that you'd ever been to?
I have been to a couple. I went to the FanDuel NBA one a couple of years ago, and I was at the DraftKings NBA final in San Francisco this past winter, but this was the first MLB one I'd gone to. So it's definitely it's a different experience, especially kind of the actual sweat of the final for baseball is just so much different than NBA because, a home run just completely swings everything. And especially this year was kind of crazy because the Brewers Nationals game was it was super chalky. So tons of people had players in that game, and then it ended up, going back and forth and going into extra to 13 runs apiece. So it was a bit nuts, but it was a really good time.
Now, what was that sweat like in the room? I know that, I was following it as the night progressed and seeing some of the guys that were in the top five, and then the gentleman who ended up winning, he started to run with it late. What was it like when the standings are changing so quickly and on a dime there were so many home runs hit on Saturday. So what was that like in the room with the ups and downs of all the stats coming in?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was talking to a friend about this, that there are kind of two different types of people in the room, and there are the people that are cheering for every single thing. I think so. Trent Grisham was 46% owned. He's like the 2,900 leadoff guy for the Brewers, and I think he got a walk in his second plate appearance, and half the room started cheering. And I was like, "Come on, guys, with a 46% owned walk, you don't really need to be cheering that." But then, so there are people that are cheering for everything, and then the other half is the people that are just kind of sitting there. I think it's a lot of people that do it for a living, and they're almost, I don't want to say numb to it, but they didn't get quite as into the, every single play. But I like the people that get into it, and like you said, the guy that was in first was he ran away with it, I think, before it got even really crazy at the end. But there are a lot of people, there's so much money at stake that people are still sweating second and third and top 10. So everybody's basically standing up when we were in extra innings, and I think there was like an Eric Thames home run at the end, and a bunch of people were cheering for that. So it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely on one of my bucket lists as a player. That's it can get really expensive. I was looking at a sheet this morning of what it costs some people just to get the live final seat. So it's something that as I move up, I'm definitely going to attack a little bit more aggressively. And if I do win a seat to baseball, you can be my guest, Matt. I promise.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I entered a few of the qualifier contests trying to get in, but I'm almost glad I didn't, because I know that I would have probably gotten like top or bottom 10% in this one, just because so much of the chalk went off, and I'm very much a contrarian type player, so I probably not have done very well.
And that's what's so interesting about like the live final, and the aspect of it is, you can run pretty pure to get a ticket, and then everything can fall apart if it doesn't break, if variance doesn't break for you that way, or if you choose to take a stand on a team and it doesn't work out. It's very rewarding, of course, if you win, but man, I don't think the realization for most casual players, they just see the glitz and the glamour, but they don't really realize how unforgiving it can be trying to get there.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's, one day MLB contest, against the best players in the world. So it's essentially just it's for fun, but I don't think there's too much, there's so much variance in just that one contest that, you go for the experience and you hope that you get lucky, but, you can't really, expect too much.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that, and I'm glad you were able to be our correspondent there unintentionally. When you told me you just got back, I'm like, well, I'm definitely going to ask about that. But I want to turn the conversation back to you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself for people that aren't familiar. Walk us through how your fantasy journey began, and then we'll talk about where you're at now.
Yeah, for sure. So I actually, a lot of people were asking me about that this weekend, and I didn't actually create SaberSim for DFS or betting or anything. I was a huge baseball stats nerd kind of through college, and then when I graduated, I was doing some blogging for some sites. I started just doing like some blogging for a Yankees site, and then I started doing more sabermetrics type stuff. I was doing some running for Fangraphs for a while, and then as I was doing that, I was getting farther away from the writing part of it and more into the research and the stats and doing queries and stuff. And then at some point I wanted to like write a baseball sim to answer some research question. And so I sort of taught myself coding by writing this really simple baseball simulator, and it worked. And then I kept adding to it. And then eventually I was kind of tweeting about it, and somebody was like, hey man, you should like look into DFS. You should sim the games. And I make projections, and it all kind of, so I started doing that, and it just sort of snowballed into, the company that it is today. But, it was not originally made for DFS, which, I think there's almost some benefit of that, in that I didn't have the biases of like trying to achieve a certain end goal of like, okay, I'm going to make something that's good for DFS. I wanted to make something that was just accurate, that simulated games accurately, and that had good data and good outputs. And then I think it just naturally became something that was really valuable for daily fantasy players, for sports bettors.
Now, how long did it take Sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say, how long did it take during that transitionary period of, hey, this is something fun as a passion project to, developing into a full-scale business?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, there wasn't like one point where it turned into that. So I think I first created it maybe in 2014, and then I sort of turned it into a website in 2015. And I think MLB season 2015 was when I kind of started sending out links, and I joined some DFS communities, and I ended up meeting a lot of people that I still am friends with today through that. And then I started, kind of doing a subscription model for that, I think the following season. And then that was when I was adding the other sports, NHL, NBA, and NFL as well. So it's kind of been a slow transition where, I added the subscription model, but I wasn't doing it full time. I've been kind of going back and forth between doing it part time and full time, and just like trying to make it work. But obviously it's tough to go all in on something like that without much financial security. But yeah, and then I've been doing it full time now for probably 9 months, and that's why I recently started teaming up with Giant Squid, and then Danny and Max Steinberg, who I think are on your show the next 2 days, and partner up with those guys who are, kind of legends in the poker industry a while back, and now are, professional DFS players, and they're able to really, I think, jumpstart the business in terms of just the name recognition, but also they have so much expertise in DFS and sports in general that it's been super valuable to help me improve the models, but then also let me focus on the things that I'm best at, and let other people help me with other parts of the business. So.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the things I did want to touch bases with you is, and you also hired a CEO. Talk to us a little bit more about that thought process of, hey, you know what, I'm really good at this certain skill set. I want to, continue to focus on what I like doing, focus on my strength. So talk to us a little bit more about that process of bringing on a team and what went into the members of the team that you decided to add to help you grow this thing.
Yeah. So, I've been doing this for a while, and I love working on the website and working on the models and just like adding tools and improving tools. But I always hated like the business aspect of it, and like marketing and like there's just I get pulled in so many different directions when I'm, dealing with customer support and like business stuff, but then also trying to like improve the product. And so I've definitely been wanting to kind of, team up with people, or like get investment, or like some things to move in a direction where I can focus on what I'm good at. So actually, yeah, Andy's our CEO now, and he's really good friends with Julian, who's Giant Squid, and then Max and Danny as well. And so they reached out to me probably about a year ago as just users of the site, and were kind of interested, asking, looking for investment, and we kind of came up with a plan where we'd all essentially partner up and be co-owners in the company, and really just like go all in with it. And it gave me the security to like be able to go full time, and like now I'm able to put like 90%, 100% of my effort and work time into the product itself, and that's what allowed me to do. We did a whole new website relaunch for baseball season, and because I was able to put up so much time into it, I think it made it so much easier to like put out a product that was real high quality, and I think way better than what I had built before. Even though what I had built before was good, and I know people like you are still using that, the projections in that site, but I think the product that we released this MLB season that we're kind of moving forward is, kind of a big upgrade in terms of a lot of the tools that we offer.
So I want to talk a little bit more about that, because that's one of the things that really stands out to me as a SaberSim user from when I started beginning of last baseball season to this year, is just the constant improvement. What's going into that? Is that just how your brain works, of just consistently trying to solve the problem in a more simpler way, more efficient way? Is it just the thing that fires you up in coding, or the data, or the scraping, or everything that goes into your process? Can you talk to us a little bit more about the transition of where the product came from to where it is now, and the genesis that led to how it is and where it's going?
Yeah. So, I when I first started doing SaberSim, like I said, I wasn't playing DFS, but I started kind of playing it as I was making the product and making the projections. And I think I realized pretty quickly, as most people do, that just running, like projection. When I first started playing, I was literally just running the optimal lineups using projections. And, like as you and most people listening to this know, that's not going to win you any money in GPPs, because what matters for winning is getting that upside and the correlation. You want the ceiling of your entire lineup. And I was realizing that, this past year or two, that what I had authored on the site was still focusing on like just mean projection. We had all these distributions and the percentiles and stuff, but the actual process of building lineups is just based on optimizing the sum of projections. And I just felt like that's really valuable in tools that are out there, like, Fantasy Cruncher or whatever, Fantasy Labs. They're great, and a lot of people use them, and they can kind of manipulate the settings of those sites to get to that point where you're getting lineups with high upside that have correlation and incorporated ownership and all that stuff. But I wanted to make something that really utilized the biggest value, as I see it, of SaberSim, which is the full distributions of projections. So really the projections that we have on the site are just the average of thousands of simulations of the game. And I felt like I wanted to build a lineup tool that really took advantage of that and built lineups not based on optimizing projection, but based on like what lineups actually have real upside and the real, the simulations that we're running of the game. So, I think just sort of to answer your question, like my brain is definitely like, I'm always trying to get better at solving these problems. And as a DFS player, I knew like the solutions out there weren't quite right, and they weren't really getting at the problem that I felt needed to be solved, which is, building lineups that organically have that overall upside.
So that leads me into another thing I wanted to pick your brain on. What is something that you don't think most people realize or understand about SaberSim that you wish you could tell them, or they wish that they knew more about? Because I think what you just described is along those lines, but as the creator, can you help paint a better picture of, just go a little bit deeper on what you're just talking about with a projection versus simulation?
Yeah. So the way that the lineup builder that we released this year works is it literally does not use projections, which sounds crazy, especially because probably a majority of people that either use or have heard of SaberSim think of it as a projection site. So what we do is, we're simulating these thousands of games, and then when we're actually building the lineups, we're taking kind of snapshots of groups of simulations for each lineup. And so we might take a group of, 20 simulations of a game and use the projections for those 20 games. And that's almost our way of sort of incorporating variance. And I don't want to say randomness, because it's not really random. It's the natural variance that is part of the actual games, the actual MLB players. But we're building lineups based on kind of these groupings of sims. And so you don't only get like really good distributions. They're not normal. They're actual distributions that occur, but then you're also getting the correlations alongside that. So if in a group of sims, Mike Trout does really well and he has an average of 18 points, even though his overall projection is 13, then the rest of his lineup is also going to be slightly above that, because in those simulations, he's doing well and the rest of them are likely to do well, and the opposing pitcher does worse. And so it's this process of building lineups that is just, I think, is a more organic way of getting those stacks and the upside of the players, because it's not using projections at all. You can sort by projection at the end. So we're kind of creating a pool of like 1,000 or more lineups to choose from that all are like have upside within a group of simulations. And then you can kind of sort and manage the exposures after the fact once you build that pool of lineups. But that pool, isn't being created from projections at all. And for me, like I think that's a good thing, because everybody that's using projections is going to end up on the same players, and you're not going to end up actually getting the upside or having the correlation and the upside built into your lineups in the same way.
And this is the only product out there that's currently doing this, right? Is building lineups this way?
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge, I know, like, I've seen the word simulation used on other sites. I don't really know how others do it. I'm pretty confident that certainly in terms of building lineups, we have a pretty unique approach in that sense. And it's not like this is the absolutely perfect way of doing things. I don't want to be here trying to say like we've solved DFS and this is like the 100% best thing. But I think what my goal is to get closer to that point of the actual goal of how we're building lineups and the best way to do things. And I think, just focusing on projection and maximizing projection isn't really the way to do it. Even though that's what I've been doing for the past few years, I think the way that this new site is working is kind of the way forward for DFS, personally.
Now, with that in mind, with the input that you've got from Giant Squid and Danny and Max, how have they been able to voice their input in terms of creating, if you guys are on the precipice of going to where DFS is going to be, not where it is, how much input have they filtered into your help with this, or is this all, Matt's brainchild and they're adjusting it along the way? How's the team effort working in that regard?
Yeah, so Max and Danny are like sports nuts. They know basically every sport in and out. Especially like, Danny's a huge baseball nerd like I am, but he's also really into football and basketball. And so they've really I've had long sessions with them kind of going over the model and getting their input into, I'll go through the way that the model works with kind of creating these projections that go into the sim and just discussing like, how does this work? And they'll ask questions and they'll offer input like, well, what if we did it this way? What if we use this sort of stat? What if we model things this way? And so it's just their like amazing knowledge of these sports, and they're just extremely smart as well. And so they're able to just offer that input. And then Max is also, he's like a data science guy, and so he built the model for golf. So we added golf to the site this year, and he built that. Golf is like the first sport where I didn't really have that much to do with it, because Max built the model, and then Julian Giant Squid helped with a lot of the back end architecture. So they've really offered a lot in terms of the sports knowledge of helping with the models, and then building additional stuff. And then for NFL, they're working on doing some models for predicting pace of play. So we're improving a lot in terms of the pace of play, and then stuff like yards after the catch is something that's really difficult to model the distribution of that in a sim, where how often are people getting 10-yard catches, 20 or 90, whatever, and that's really difficult to model, and they're helping with that kind of thing, and tons of other stuff. But that sort of gives you an idea of what they're doing to help in the background.
Well, that's interesting to know, because one of the things that I was really excited to have you on today is something that you're just talking about that I'd like you to dive a little bit more into. Is we've heard quite a bit about just wait until you see what we've done with NFL. You guys aren't going to believe what's happening with our NFL product, and I'm thrilled to see what you guys are doing, because I think that I'm approaching NFL in a much different way this year. And I think what you guys are setting out to accomplish, especially with somebody like me who likes to be contrarian in how I'm going to go about getting my leverage, I think that what you guys are putting together from a simulation-based model versus projections is going to be game-changing with the NFL. So can you tease a little bit more about what's going into your NFL product, in addition to what you just said? When can we expect it to go live? And, what is the couple takeaways that we should be looking for as users of the NFL product?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of, the overall tools, it's going to be similar to MLB. I don't think the NFL was really released to the public with the new 2.0 website. So just the tools of being able to build lineups using the simulations and be able to incorporate correlation and ownership and the true distributions of events into your lineups. You'll be able to do all that with NFL just like with MLB. So I think that'll be a really cool way of ownership NFL is just interesting because, it has a lot of variance like MLB. I think it has more variance than people think. But then there are sometimes these plays that are just so obvious where, it's going to be a min price guy that's starting at running back, and he'll be 70% owned. And sometimes it's hard to know, like, well, what exposure should I have for this guy? Do I want to match the field? Do I want to go under? And I think kind of having ownership projections and having a lineup builder that it lets you incorporate the upside of players and the ownership will make it easier to not have to necessarily make a decision about every player that way. You'll be able to adjust exposures after the fact, but, the sim and the lineup builder will be able to sort of give you a baseline of like, all right, we've got this 70% owned min price starting running back. Your lineups are originally going to have 40%. You can adjust it up or down, but that's what we suggest given his distribution in the sim. I think that's something that's really valuable. And then the model itself, we're making a lot of improvements just in terms of the accuracy of the projections, and especially like depth charts and usage projections are something that I've struggled with in the past because it's a lot harder to model stuff like the distribution of carries. One guy might get 60% of snaps, another guy will get 40, and then there's coaching decisions that go into that. And so we're putting a lot of work into making that part more accurate, the kind of target and carry share between players, and then trying to kind of make it get a little bit closer to the Vegas lines where we're still going to have some differentiation, but I think we'll just be a lot more in line with the overall market in terms of like the gains, but it's going to be like really, I think it's going to be really accurate projections and tons of improvement over last year. And I think last year went really well, but I think I'm really excited about what's coming this year, both just in terms of the model and the lineup builder and how that all comes together.
Now, how do you balance that human element with the numbers? Because I know that it can be very because one of the things that I struggle with NFL is, the human element of, hey, I'm going to project Michael Thomas for 27 points, and it's like, all right, well then, a traditional lineup builder is going to give me a lot of Michael Thomas, but what if it's a day where Michael Thomas gets locked down and Breeze has to pivot to other targets like Kamara or one of the backup wide receivers like Ted Ginn, Traquan Smith, or a tight end in the mix. And the biggest thing that I'm going to be looking to get better at is those wide receiver distributions, because you've got to have the fine line of exposure to that second or third wide receiver without going overboard. If you're going to be on the chalk receiver with chalky game stack, how do you differentiate? So what about in your new model can help with that? I know you mentioned some of the target shares. So how are you mixing in the human element of, hey, Michael Thomas has a 25% market share, but we're looking at a potential matchup here with a better corner where it's going to be harder for him to get open that day, something like that?
Yeah, so I do think that the just kind of overall projections with having more accurate market share projections will help with that. I also think the way that we're building lineups is going to be a way to just naturally incorporate that. You don't even, without even having that human element, because if we have these 5,000 sims or whatever that in a large majority of them, maybe Michael Thomas is, a great play and he gets more points than the backup wide receivers. But if you're using this, what we call smart diversity, where it's using these groups of sims, you're going to get those other receivers in some lineups because they're going to do well in certain simulations of the game. And so I think having a process that incorporates that natural variance a bit better is going to help. But I also think NFL is one of those sports where, it does help to do research and have manual intervention. We're trying to build a product that doesn't require that much tinkering and that gives you high quality lineups from the get-go. But I think, doing research and trying to incorporate things that might not be accounted for in the model is a really valuable. I mean, that's how I think a lot of pros are able to have a ton of success, is they have a really good baseline model and baseline exposures, and then they do their research. They're digging through Twitter and as many sources as they can find, and trying to figure out like what are the good matchups and what can we expect from market share of these players, and are able to kind of make adjustments to their exposures to different players, especially like you said with the wide receivers and kind of getting exposures to guys that might do well if certain others don't. I think that's definitely valuable, and you can incorporate that manual intervention and research on top of a really good baseline. That's my opinion on how best to do that.
So with 5,000 simulations, so when I hear that sounds overwhelming. So what's the simplest way for a player that, let's say you have a handful of lineups to choose from? What's the best way to execute in a simple way to get what you want without going too far down the rabbit hole in really getting in your own way?
In terms of like just taking it, are you saying like more as a single entry player or three max, like figuring out like how of all of these lineups which ones do I go with?
Yeah, so if you had to narrow it down to if it gives you 1,000 different options and you're working your way to a 20x or a 150, what's the best way to do that where you're getting that nice balanced exposure without trying to fine tune it and mess up all the hard work that the algorithm put in to get you what it put out?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that I don't want to act like I know the perfect answer to that. I think everyone has a little bit of a different philosophy and approach to how they manage risk and in their exposures. Especially for ML, I feel like I'm more comfortable with MLB. So just like talking about MLB, I know a lot of people are more of the not necessarily play everyone, but kind of limit the exposure to those top stacks and really, spread out, maybe pick a few stacks that you really like, but you're not going to go all in on certain teams. But then, other people think, look, if and I'm almost on this approach, is if I have leverage for a stack or a pitcher or whatever, if I think that the combination of projections and ownerships really just like the stack, go for it. And I like that because if you have leverage on a play, then you're kind of, the more you limit that play, the more expected value you're giving up. And it's gonna be way higher variance in terms of your return on investment. You're gonna have a lot of losing days that way. But I think what's tough about something like NFL, where there's only, 16 or 20, including the playoffs, 20 weeks in the season, if variance doesn't go your way, you might have a bad season if you try to go really heavy on under-owned players and it just doesn't work out. And so I think people are a little afraid of that risk, and that's understandable. So I think you kind of have to have a middle ground between, you don't want to have too much risk. You want to give yourself the best chance of winning in a certain week, but I think you also don't want to give up too much of your edge in your exposures. And so if, for example, the SaberSim is giving you, really heavy exposure to a certain like QB wide receiver stack, I don't want to give a specific answer, but I would say like I would want to go pretty heavy on them. But there's a lot of teams in every given slate. There's 24 different teams to choose from in this first week one slate, and so you can be way overweight on a certain stack and still have exposure to other teams that you might have leverage on, even if it's not quite that extent. So I would say like look at what your builder's giving you with in terms of just the combination of upside and ownership, and see which teams it likes and try to limit risk, but don't limit it enough that it's just completely taking away and you're just paying rake.
So that's interesting, because I think that the science behind what you guys have put together is empowering players more with, hey, this is what the data shows based off of how many times we've played this game out, resulting in what this guy or this stat could potentially do. That makes me feel a lot more confident than, hey, you know what, I had a good breakfast this morning and I'm feeling good about Drew Brees. It's like some of these projections that are out there, I just feel I don't feel very confident in them. And then if you don't have confidence building your lineups, like, you've already lost. You're going to start gravitating to those safer, those chalkier plays. And we've seen that, to win a big tournament, you might have some exposure to chalk, but it's those guys that are unowned that nobody else is thinking of. And that's one of the things I love about what you guys are doing is you guys are doing that thinking for me. And you guys are putting me in a position where I just have to narrow down, hey, this is my menu of options. This looks great. Let's move forward. Or, hey, let's tinker a little bit. So I really like we're seeing the player empowerment in the NBA, and I think we're seeing a player empowerment in DFS. So I'm super excited about when this product is launching. When can I start playing around with it?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I forgot that you asked that. Yeah, so it's close. I've been working pretty much nonstop on getting the NFL product ready, and as we speak, I'm literally looking at the projections for week one. I'm just doing some final fixes around the builder. I just want to make sure that things are like working well from the start. I don't want to release something that's not fully functional. So the projections are basically ready. I can tell you we're big fans of Nick Chubb week one, so put that on your list. But it'll be ready this week for sure, and hopefully everybody can play around with it and get some good feedback on how people are liking the new site with NFL and run some lineups and stuff. But this week it should be ready, and definitely let you know and let everybody know on Twitter and stuff. And I'm pumped for it.
Now, I just want to dive back into the Nick Chubb assumption. So does the simulation account for player injury? Because that is the only thing about with the NFL being, a more, impactful sport in terms of the physical contact. If the numbers say Nick Chubb, 100%, I'm fine with that. But the only thing that makes me nervous as a player is what if he gets hurt? So are there any simulations ran where that's a possibility? So if that does happen, you can, have something to pivot on in your, let's get that min price back up. I think the guy's name is Hilliard. Is that factored in to transfer some of your risk? I don't know if that's something you guys have thought about, but that's just the one thing with NFL is injuries that makes me nervous. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So I have thought about that. That's not in the sims right now, the injury risk. I think that's something that would be really cool to do. It's actually for NBA. I've thought a lot about that, of doing, especially for questionable players, not necessarily like injury in the game, but having kind of multiple sims run for the different scenarios where if there's a questionable player and you're not sure if he's going to play, having kind of two different sets of sims. And I think that's something for the future to incorporate that kind of thing, or incorporate injuries into it. That's another thing where I wouldn't want to do that half-assed. I would want to not just have random injuries, but kind of model what's the injury risk and what happens in actual games when a player gets injured, and what's the likelihood given their position and their age and all that. So I definitely want to put some work into that. But yeah, that's not incorporated in the sim now, and so that's another thing where having manual research and intervention can be valuable. If there's a guy that has injury risk, giving yourself some exposure to their backup, even if their projection isn't that high. I think it's a sharp thing to do, and something where really putting in the work is and doing that research can be valuable.
I like it, especially with the NBA thing. I think we see that pretty often, with these questionable tags, and there's no responsibility for the league to get anything out, which makes it really hard for us players. And there's a lot of edge to be able to read through that gray area. So incorporating something like that for NBA it sounds awesome. And yeah, I really like and that's one of my favorite things about SaberSim is, when I initially hopped on a phone call with you and Andy about, putting together, some presentations on your product, you guys had said, hey, we really like that you don't tell people who to play. And I was like, yeah, I have enough of a heart attack every day sweating out my own action. And the last thing I need is, to be called an MFer on the internet by strangers because I told them to go in on a tiger stack just because I'm comfortable with it. And I know the failure rate is high doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to embrace that kind of risk and variance. So talk to us a little bit more about that approach and empowering your players and what it's like actually being on the other side as a content producer versus us that are just players using the tools.
Yeah. So, we're definitely on kind of the no touting line. So I don't ever want to be a tout or try to give people specific plays or lineups. There are a lot of people that are so used to these providers, these content providers that just give out like, what are your top 5 pitching plays, or selling lineups or whatever. And I think that's just such a bad way of approaching DFS in general. I think there are certain guys that are really smart and really good at that content, and I think it can be a good supplement to have that sort of expertise, especially if it's something that. So for me, what I think the best content is not just, hey, this guy has a good play because of his stats, his strikeout rate in the opposing team matchup or whatever, because that's all stuff that's incorporated into most projection systems, and not just SaberSim. I mean, any projection system is going to have pretty decent grasp on value and projection just based off the matchup and stats and all that. But I think having that extra info on, especially something like NFL, where you're talking about that specific, the cornerback matchup, or this is what the trend has been with the coaches' usage of certain players, stuff like that, where it's expertise. I think that's the kind of content that can be valuable as a supplement to your baseline projections. But I think, I'm not really someone that wants to tout, but I think there's a lot of possible content that can supplement that. And then, we are thinking about doing some content for SaberSim in the future, but I think it's not going to be about giving out plays. It's going to be at really utilizing the data that we have and pointing out interesting ways to look at that data. And so stuff with the distributions where we can talk about, in the simulation, how often does this player hit his ceiling? How often does he reach value so that he would be a good play? Like, how does he correlate with this other player? When this one guy hits the ceiling, how does that affect the rest of the game? And that's all stuff that we're pretty unique in being able to answer. And so that's the kind of content that I think when we do provide content in the future, that's the kind of content I want to provide, is something that utilizes the data that is unique to our system. And it's not just, here are the top 5 pitcher projections for the day, because that's not useful to anyone. What's useful is that unique data or knowledge that we as a system, or even just some other content provider, they might have expertise in, if that makes sense.
And I think that'll be beneficial to us as players if we're running simulations and we see a player popping up. The exposure is really high, but it's also backed up with a content piece that you guys have also put out, just to give us a little background on, okay, why we have confidence now, instead of tinkering it and lowering the exposure on this certain player, that to say, hey, this matches the content,
for sure,
and it's backed by this type of data. It's not just noise. There's a reason why we should be heavy on this player, and not tinker with it and create something bad for us as a player.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really good to, you have that baseline of the data, and you start with the data, and then you have, you kind of dig into, like, why is this showing up this way? And then you can kind of figure out, what can you do if you do want to do your own research, do the right kind of research and know what's going into the data, and then be able to adjust things based on that other, the research on top of that. I'm always very against when people are looking at, like, the Fangraph stats for baseball players or something, where they're like, well, look, I mean, he has a really good strikeout rate this year, and so he's a good play. Like, all that stuff is in the project. That's kind of not useful research. Or even stuff like weather, where it's 90 degrees in Washington, D.C. today, so the Nationals are a good chance to have a high-scoring game. It's like, yeah, that's incorporated into Vegas odds, incorporated into projections. Go beyond that, and if you're going to do research, figure out the stuff that models might not be accounting for.
Yeah, and that's good to hear, because you're also a player. So a player providing content means a lot more than a tout who doesn't play providing content.
Right, yeah.
And that's one of the things that I really like about, the direction you guys are headed in is it's backed by really good players. Like one of the things I try to do is get people pointed in the right direction of, hey, touts, most of the time aren't in it for the right reasons. Let's support the people that are in it in the right reasons and can help educate us as better players. And, sometimes I'll work with a player that's struggling and I'm just like, you just need to trust what SaberSim's doing. I was like, they're much smarter people than us and a lot of data goes into it. And like what Chris just mentioned, he just reminded me of a story of, when Matt Yastrzemski got called up with the Giants, he was popping up a bunch. And I didn't know who this guy is. And this is what I love about SaberSim is because you guys do so much work that it helps quickly educate a player like me. And he was showing up in like 91% of my builds. And I was like, you know what? I trust what these guys have done. They know way more than I do. And Yastrzemski started the game off with a triple, and then I think in the sixth inning hit a home run. So he got to value, like 7x value halfway through the game. And it's like, this is why I'd like clapping my hands here, like this is why I leave this in the hands of the professional. So I really like what Chris said, and I really like what you're building in terms of, hey, if we're seeing a bunch of Michael Thomas, why? And then if we need to do more research, we can go. But we're getting, I always tell people, look for the signal over the noise. And I don't think there's anything noisy about what you guys put together. I think you guys have cut to the signal in just about everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal, is to, cut through that noise and really get at what factors matter. And I've tried to build the model in a way that we're getting as accurate as possible about incorporating the factors that matter and not the ones that don't, and getting rid of that kind of variance that affects perception of players.
Now, I want to ask you a multifaceted question in terms of being a content producer. What's your biggest challenge as a content producer? How do you handle criticism of your product or people blaming you when things don't go right? And then how do you continually separate yourself from being a content producer versus a tout? Because I'm trying to be on the forefront of telling people, hey, look, if these guys are losing DFS players, stop listening to them. You guys have a site backed by winning DFS players between Max and Danny and Squid. So talk to us a little bit more about, some of the challenges you have as a content producer, keeping your identity, and how you guys handle some of the criticism and adversity from people that don't understand how to use the product as well as they should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts about providing, projections and data for, and lineup builder for DFS is just, there's, I think, a misunderstanding of variance. And so a lot of people just, understandably, they might have a few bad games, or they see a player that's highly projected that does badly, and it looks like, well, the projections were wrong. He was projected higher and they didn't do well. And it might be the case that there was something off with the projections, but we're also, we're not projecting like this is what, or no, we're not predicting, we're projecting. That's that's what I always try to say is we're doing a simulation where we have thousands of data points, and that's the mean that you're seeing, but there's a lot of possibilities for every game. And so, what I try to do when people are criticizing is respond and, and talk about that variance part. And it's not necessarily an excuse, because there are things that we get wrong. We're not perfect, and I've been wrong. There's been plenty of issues with the model throughout the year that I've fixed. And so it's not like it's a perfect model. And I love to see when there's constructive criticism about maybe not one particular play, but if people are seeing a bias over a long period of time, or if they're seeing a certain type of player that's being under or over projected or something like that. I'm all ears for that. And I love to hear when there's issues like that, because I always want to improve that. If there's something that's wrong or something that we're not catching in the model, I want to improve that. So that's really my approach, is trying to explain variances to people in a way that they can understand. It's a long, baseball especially, but all the sports, it's a long season, and you're not going to win every day. And especially for GPPs, I mean, you're going to lose probably 90%. If you're max entry, you're going to lose 90% of the time. And you're going for that. When you win, you're winning big, and that's making up for those losses. I think most DFS pros will kind of agree with that. And that's where I want to try to help people, is variance is a real thing in all sports. And when you see a player that's projected well that does badly, that, doesn't mean everything, but it is good to look at that performance and see, was it just variance? What happened there? Was something else wrong? Was there something that I could have changed to give myself less exposure to the player because they had a high chance? If there's a guy that's 4,500, like a pitcher that's 4,500 and projected for 14 points, that's going to be a huge value. He's going to pop up all over your exposures. But that doesn't mean you should go 90% of that player, because 14 points isn't a high. That's going to give you a pretty good chance of that pitcher blowing up or underperforming, even just with that mean of 14. And so you really want to incorporate the variance and the risk into your exposures and make sure that even if the guy is projected well or has a good value, you're not being you're being smart about the way you look at them, but still trying to understand if there are biases. You can make adjustments. You can, and I love to hear about that kind of stuff as well.
It's really impressive. I think that, taking that constant learner's approach, being open to hearing, what your audience has to say is another thing that separates what you guys are doing a little bit differently. A lot of the times we see criticism, especially like on some of the more, public platforms like Twitter, turn into a pissing contest. And then, you told me to play this guy, I played this guy, I lost, screw you. And it's like, there's nothing productive in that, and I really like what you said about, knowing what the variance associated with what you're doing is. Yeah, that pitcher could get to 3x, and then you can afford a lot of other people. We saw it yesterday with the Blue Jays. Both of their opener and their long reliever had decent simulations, didn't work out. That's just how it's going to happen. These guys are professionals. Even the bad pros, the bad major league players are still in the top 1% of 1% of 1%. Like, they're still good. Like, they're still, bad pitchers are going to have good days. Good pitchers are going to have bad days. Mike Trout's going to go 0 for 5. So I think that educating your audience in such a way where, you guys talk about, creating a smarter player. And I think you're standing behind that with your overall message of, hey, this is just a tool to have to help empower you. And, if there's something that you'd like to see improved, of course, we would want to improve it, instead of taking that, standoffish approach of any time you get met with criticism, now we have enemies. It's like, I think it's pretty gross. We see that so often in the DFS community, and I really appreciate how you guys are trying to do something different and standing behind that. We're getting close to time here, so I wanted to just transition to a couple of fun topics before we let you go. So we saw Giant Squid win a Millie Maker last year. Can you talk a little bit more about what that was like for you and your team, and what you've learned from a guy like that? Because he's one of the best in the world, and to have that guy in your back pocket and on your team, I just think is incredibly valuable. Whenever I'm struggling with something, and I'm going through that downswing of variance, it's really helpful for me to know that you guys have, you and the team that you guys have to just be like, no, John, just keep weathering the storm. This is a lot of hard work and dedication is going into this. It will turn. So can you talk a little bit more about, that experience of winning the Millie Maker and what you've learned from him to help make your product better?
Yeah, for sure. That was awesome. That was not too long after I teamed up with Giant Squid and those guys that happened. So it was pretty cool to see like the SaberSim logo on the top of the leaderboard with $1 million. It's just, it was very awesome. But in general, Giant Squid he's probably like one of the smartest people I've ever met. When I've seen him work and seen just a glimpse into the code that he's written and the process that he's done, it's kind of mind blowing. I think it would probably blow the minds of pretty much every DFS player. He's all about kind of like the automation and just doing everything completely scientifically. And he'll tell you that he doesn't even know half of the names of the players in the leagues. He's so objective and scientific and data driven about everything that he's just built these complex models and algorithms that just perform so well. And I think that Millie Maker, obviously anytime you win the Millie Maker, you've got a lot of luck on your side. But the way that he's built everything and his approach is just, he deserved it for sure. I'm pretty sure that won't happen again this year, because you can't that's not gonna happen for anyone without a lot of luck. But I mean, he has just a rock solid process, and I definitely learned a lot just in terms of especially his coding ability and I've learned a lot from him even so far, just how to make the SaberSim back-end infrastructure more efficient and how to write code in certain ways. And so I'm very much looking forward to incorporating more of his expertise in that area into, my own personal growth and the growth of the business and the code base in general.
And I think that it's evident in the product, what we've seen. And I just want to say, 2019 was just a monster year for you guys. You added golf. We have new team members aboard behind the product. You guys transitioned with 2.0. You've talked about what's in store for the NFL product. What can we, what else is in store in 2020 for some of the other products like the NBA and the NHL? And then we'll let you go.
Yeah, so obviously NBA and NHL, we're going to be moving to the same, new lineup building tool, being able to incorporate all of that same stuff that I've already talked about with those sports. We're adding some cool features pretty soon. That's going to be a way to kind of manage all of your entries a lot better. So I think that is going to be really valuable, especially for casual players. It's such a pain to have to manage like the CSV files with your entries, and you're making all these lineups and then have to open Excel and download your lineups and like enter everything into there. And so we're trying to make it easier for those guys that are maybe newer to DFS, don't have much experience with spreadsheets and Excel, and being able to just like edit their entries a lot easier and manage that. And it's just quicker too, especially for NBA when we're getting up close to lock. You want to be able to edit your entries really fast. So we're working on ways to make it easier for the casual players who don't have necessarily the time of a pro. They don't have all day. They might be, at work trying to enter lineups into the contest at lock. And so we're working on stuff like that. And then improving the mobile experience a lot is our kind of next big project, because that's something where I want to make it easier, again, for people that aren't doing this full time and have their own workstation set up, if they're entering lines on their phone, want to make it easier for that. So that's kind of, we're trying to really focus on that experience. And then I think after that, I mean, I'm trying to really do everything I can to make the model as good as possible. So like NBA especially, I'm putting a lot of work into just improving the accuracy of, the minutes and the usage, and then just the overall model, making that as good and as accurate as possible. Because really, that's going to make a huge difference to the experience of the users. If the model's good, then you'll win long term. So yeah, that's sort of my priorities for the next few months of the year, and then we'll see what happens after that.
Well, it's very exciting. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us, Matt, and help paint a picture of what goes on behind the scenes, because I think that, it can be very overwhelming for some of us that don't have, a data or computer science or a coding background to help work our way through this. And I think you painted a great picture for, the dummies like me out here who love your product but don't necessarily understand everything that goes into it. But I don't want to know how to do that. I just want to be able to focus on how to play my game. So I think you guys have just been an absolute outstanding partner for me in my DFS career, and I'm just seeing rocket fueled, injected results this baseball season. So I'm excited for what you guys have in store. I appreciate Chris joining me today on the podcast. But before we let you go, Matt, just plug anything and everything, and direct everybody to everything you guys got going on right now.
Yeah, well, it's pretty simple. SaberSim.com, that's the URL. So, we have a 3-day trial for the DFS, and we also have the sports betting subscription as well. So definitely, try us out. When you sign up, you'll get access to the Slack community, which I think it's growing, and it's been really valuable for a lot of users, especially if you're new to DFS, or even if you're not new. I think it's really good to have that community of users to ask questions to, and I'm on there all the time as well. So, I would love for, people to sign up and just, send me a message and say what's up, say you heard about us from this podcast. But yeah, SaberSim.com, that's pretty much it. But yeah, I really appreciate. I want to shout out. I was looking at your Twitch chat and someone mentioned Raj. I just want to shout out a congrats to I think Jesse from the Discord won big yesterday, and then Raj also had a big. So lots of guys from that community won big yesterday. So congrats to them. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Well, Jesse didn't just win yesterday. Jesse's been winning all month. Like, he's won all the money on DraftKings.
Yeah, he doesn't even really deserve congrats at this point. It's getting old, but
I mean, maybe we just need to complain about running worse than everybody else, and we'll start running super good. No, he's an incredible player. I love both of those guys. Raj is low stakes, micro stakes grinder like myself. I know Jesse started out there, and he's been taking the DFS world by fire. I'd love to have them on the podcast. It's awesome seeing them light up the scoreboards, and it's always cool when if you can't win, seeing other players that are putting in the work. I got no problem with that. So yeah, and those guys are both using your product. I use your product. Chris this is for sure playing baseball, and I think he's learned a ton today. And dude, I'm just fired up to know you guys, and you guys have been super receptive of, hey, I have this idea, I want to talk about your channel, and you guys are all all about it, and didn't tell me, hey, do this and this. Like, dude, do your thing, man. So Matt, thank you again, and yeah, dude, we'll have to have you guys on again, and anybody on your team is more than welcome to come on the podcast. I'm excited to talk to Max and Danny later this week, so I appreciate you so much, buddy.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, John and Chris.
All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Chris, I appreciate you taking the time out of your trip out here to Austin.
Thank you for having me here, JG.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. And yeah, check us out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you guys tomorrow night with Danny from SaberSim. God bless. See you guys then.